So next up, we are going to have Nick Junius talking about play as in stage play, designing dynamic narrative moments through character acting. Nick's an independent game developer and PhD candidate in computational media at UC Santa Cruz, one of the favorite institutions of Roguelike Celebration, home of many speakers. And there, Nick is developing digital acting systems for game characters. Their background as a playwright has led them to draw heavily from experience with theatrical productions, and in particular acting practices, to build systems that enable players and NPCs to perform and interpret scenes together. So we can go ahead and play that talk. Nick will be around, hopefully, for discussion.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nick. Hi, everyone. I'm Nick, and I'm going to be talking about ways of using theater in system design, as well as why you would want to even do such a thing. First, I will start with a little bit about myself. I am a PhD candidate at UC Santa Cruz in the computational media department, working in the interaction dynamics lab, where I research character AI and design character AI and build and study interactive narrative systems. I am also an indie game developer. I make a mix of text-based games and AI-based games for interactive narratives, which is what this talk is about. And I don't do machine learning kind of AI. I am a pure symbolics person, pure rules-based. And also, I'm a playwright. I've had multiple shows produced, and arguably without writing plays and getting them produced, I wouldn't be doing the work that I'm currently doing. I wouldn't be designing the systems I currently am, any of it, because the theater production process is fascinating and I want to share it with you all. So to come back to what this talk is about, it is my attempt to answer the question, how do we make this kind of thing, i.e. character interaction, even more systemic and narrative feeling than what we currently do? And I also want to make sure this isn't seen as a dig against Cataclysm Dark Days Ahead. It has some amazing systemic character things in it, especially the way that characters make first impressions of you. This talk is mostly like, I want more of that kind of thing. I want that to be a huge part of like the way that we can design character interactions. So my broadest possible answer, as you probably could guess, to this problem of how do we make more interesting character interaction is theater. So I want to talk first about sort of in general why we should be looking at theater as systemic game developers before talking more in depth about my approach to translating theater into game systems. So theater, if you're not familiar, is very playful by design in its approach, to the point that we call the works it produces plays. And when you work in theater or in a theatrical style, what you are ultimately doing is playing with characters, playing with the themes in a story, playing with moments, all of these things and more to make something new, even in a story that's been told for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So like, we still produce Shakespeare. We still retell Shakespeare. I am coming back from the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, where I have seen multiple versions of most of these plays at some point. Or thousands of years with Greek tragedy. Like, we're still making these, we're still producing them, we're still telling these stories, because there's always something you can find in them. And you might ask, okay, well, doesn't that mean, even with all that, even with being able to find these things, aren't scripts forcing structure and forcing a bunch of creative choices onto everyone else. And yes, but it's not as true as you might expect. Something, if you're a playwright, that you have to very deeply come to grips with pretty quickly is anything that you make is going to be unfinished. And there's never going to be a single universal version of your story, because the nature of theater is every single one of these productions is different, and it has to be to make it relevant for the audience and relevant for the people at the time it is produced. And the production process is the thing that really finishes a play. And you finish a play by pulling at it, poking it, playing with all of its themes, what parts of it you want to highlight, how you want to play characters, and all of these other bits of stagecraft you can do to support the themes you want to highlight in the script. And again, this is why no two productions of the same play are ever the same, even if they take place in the same year, even with the same people involved, because everything about the production process is about trying new things and playing with what you have available to you. And so to sort of frame the first little section of this talk, I want to argue that theater is an analog human-powered generator of stories. And it's one that we've been iterating and refining for a few thousand years at this point. And the two components of the generator are your constraints, which are the play script and anything else the playwright will force you to do around the script, and your generative machinery that is working within those constraints to produce the final finished work of a play. Because how we tell these stories and how we tell stories in general matters just as much as what story we choose to tell and what the words we are saying are. And this is also how we can tell the same story in so many different ways and with such variation. And with this framing in mind, now we can start talking more in detail about acting, what it values, and sort of how you can be creative within even what appears to be very rigid constraints. And this last bit is what I really want to focus on with this talk. Because even if you have a story with, or a scene with no choices and it's entirely linear, that doesn't mean you can't have people find new things in it and find interactivity and find play within something that's linear. We do that all the time with levels in other kinds of games. Why can't we do that with storytelling? And so to sort of come back to what acting is about, this image right here is probably the single best example I have of summarizing what acting cares about. How you say something or do something can completely change the meaning of a line or a moment between characters. So all of these different versions of this line, all of these different line reads, have very different connotations and sort of say different things about the relationship between the speaker to who they're talking to, and give impressions about the state of the world, as it were. And to sort of return to my two Macbeths, that is a running theme of this talk. The words in these two versions of it are the same, and even like the core of each scene is, because, you know, if you're doing the scene, you have to do the scene. But there's so many small differences in here. even things just like whether or not the three witches are touching Macbeth and whether or not he's cognizant of it at all, that all is going to change how much it feels like he's being manipulated versus finding things about himself by himself, in sort of the way he approaches doing these terrible things leading to tragedy. And all of these smaller decisions about his relationship to the witches and how these scenes get played then informs the relationships he has to other characters, i.e., Lady Macbeth. And that will then change things like who of these two characters is the one really pushing for the horrible, tragic decisions to get made. In the top example, it's played a lot closer to Lady Macbeth is the one pushing everything forward. And in the bottom example, she might do a little bit of pushing, but it's ultimately him, Macbeth, making all of these choices and making the situation worse and worse constantly. But it's the same script, it's the same scenes, it's the same everything else. It's just how we're choosing to play things really can completely change the way the relationship works and thus sort of the feel of the themes of the story. And as you read through a lot of performance practices from all over the world, and across even like different kinds of performance, at some point, one of them is going to say something about performance is about finding something new in the old and familiar. And they will sometimes talk about it exclusively as like a night to night thing of how do you keep yourself, the performer, invested in the story you're telling, because if you're bored, how are you going to convince the audience to not be bored, that sort of thing. But it also is applicable to different versions and different productions of the same play, because you have to answer the question, why are we doing this play now? So you always need to be finding something new or finding some different way of presenting or relating themes to perform a play, to make a play. You have to play with the play, as it were. And to come back up to my generator, my theater generator here, you take the constraints in the shape of the story with the script, but there's potentially an infinite number of versions of this story that can be told in different versions of the themes and different ways of playing all these characters, thanks to the production process and the inherent creativity of acting and performance. And what you can then view these scripts as are story volumes, which are, if you're not familiar, they're a term coined by Jason Greenblatt, and they are generative functions that produce storylines where their meaning isn't just contained in the storylines that they produce, but also the relationships between the storylines produced as a whole. So reading Macbeth by itself, reading the script, isn't sufficient to fully explore the nature of Macbeth, the story volume. And even seeing a single production will not get you a very clear picture of all the possibilities of Macbeth. So you need to keep trying new things and keep doing different things to better explore the story volume of a play. And this is how roguelikes, i.e. Caves of Cut here in this example, can be viewed as theater, and how a play like Macbeth can be viewed as a roguelike. When you play Cud, you're always playing Cud and you're always telling a story that is contained in Cud. And when you produce Macbeth, you're always telling Macbeth, and you're always doing something that is contained in the volume of these story worlds. But the reason we keep playing them again and again and again is because we want to find something new in the old. We want to find something new in that familiar space, and we want to fully explore the space of stories possible in the story volumes that are these different experiences. And all of this positioning hopefully has convinced you that theater is relevant to roguelikes and emergent narrative discussions. And the question now is, how do we make something with this? What do we do with it? And we need to dig a little bit deeper into what acting sees as its like primary vector for being creative and how it works, which is ultimately the how of a character, the how of a scene, the how of a story. How do we do this? How do we play with it? And back to my example about line reads, different ways of saying a line, different versions of playing with a line. Excuse me. That is all something under the purview of an actor and director, but this is one of the places you can really play with the meaning of a scene and play with the meaning of a character in the scene. And then another tool that is also related to the line read itself, the way that you say the line, is physicality. And using all of your movements and expressions to convey how a character feels in juxtaposition to the text of a script, in juxtaposition even with the line read you do. And all of these things put together can add a whole extra layer of texture and theming onto a character or a scene that they wouldn't otherwise have if you weren't carefully juxtaposing everything. And another important thing about juxtaposition is you need it there to help ground all this physicality into something more concrete, because without the text, without the lines, and even without some of the line readings, exactly what a gesture means can be very vague. And when it's not grounded by anything, you at that point are making vague gestures at nothing that's readable to your audience. So if acting is built on physicality, what does this mean for us as system designers and people who care about interacting with a narrative in a systemic way? Well, when looking at the way dialogue scenes are made playable in many different games, it is often the case that the place we hand control over to our players is in what gets said, and everything else flows from that choice of what gets said. All the gestures, all the movements, all the expressions, everything that isn't exactly what gets said, down to the line readings. All of that flows off of what line gets chosen. And so there's a very, very tight coupling between the text and the lines of a scene and the reads and the gestures and the expressions that the characters perform. Which all of this is to say, there isn't very much play within a dialogue scene designed this way. There's only so many versions of this scene of these scenes that are possible, because as many options as you write, each option only has one way of playing it, and you can read it differently, but there's a limit on that versus being able to play directly with the reads and the gestures and the expressions. So if we break the tight coupling between our dialogue lines and our reads and gestures and expressions, we suddenly have the freedom to play with the feel of a scene in a dimension we didn't before. And letting all of our different kinds of expression inform the way a line gets read and a line feels suddenly lets us have a whole new dimension of interactivity. And it helps us move from strictly role playing in one sense to being able to fully act out a character and role play them instead of being constrained in a very specific way. And there's a lot of ways you can do this decoupling work. I'm going to be talking about my approach for the last bit of this talk. So I am not saying this is the only way or the way that you have to do it. In fact, I would love people to try new versions of this, take what I'm saying and the rest of the talk and run with it. Because I like seeing new things, in case that wasn't obvious. So yeah, I'm going to talk about my whole process with this. And where I sort of started is the idea that any action a character can take in the game, in the world, should convey something additional beyond the basic like form and function of that action. And these actions can be anything. They don't have to be gestures, but for the sake of this talk, I will be mostly talking about them as gestures. So they need to convey something extra, some other expressive quality that other characters can then understand, interpret, and react to continue the scene and continue this sort of live interpretation. And we do have some existing examples of the way building your entire game around physicality and the way characters express physicality looks, and that's fighting games. And if you're not familiar, fighting games have this idea of frame data attached to every single action a character can take, which details all the different ways your attacks interact with another character, whether or not they hit them or you whiff or they block. All of that is contained in the frame data. And my sort of pitch here, in the way that I approach doing this, is rather than using that sort of markup of animations and physicality to express how dangerous something is, when it becomes dangerous, what happens if it connects, what happens if it blocks or is blocked, that sort of thing. What if instead we attached an expression of emotional affect to these gestures and actions that then allow you to have specific emotions conveyed by gestures, which then inform what your other character perceives you as, and then they can make choices about the way they act based on what they see you doing. And ultimately, the goal here is building a language of physicality. And ultimately this is also what I want to encourage you all to do, is create a small language that your human and AI characters can use to communicate at a similar level to each other at. So the example I'm using here is having a set of actions available for one character. So they can point in a couple different ways. They can point aggressively or lazily, or they can shrug nonchalantly or shrug dismissively. And these all convey certain things about how this, or this is how the character would want to convey something about them, about the way they are feeling. So they pick something to do. In this case, it's shrug nonchalantly. And then our other characters will now respond and react and think about what this first character is doing based on sort of their relationships, their opinions, their read of the situation, any kind of information you want to factor in. So if they like character 0, so character 1 apparently likes character 0, they generally agree with the fact that that being nonchalant and chill is fine, so they'll do something back that reflects that, in this case, shrug nonchalantly. And character 2, in this situation, will see character 0 being nonchalant and go, this ain't the time for that. This is a more formal occasion. Point aggressively at them and go, let's say, you need to shape up, buddy, or something like that. So to wrap up, after my example there, acting and having this sort of language for characters is ultimately about trying to, again, find something new in the old and get fresh perspectives on stories and themes and even like parts of stories in ways that you might not expect. And we can encourage our players to do this and encourage ourselves to allow this to happen more organically by decoupling our line reads and gestures and expressions from our dialogue to then let players play with those elements and do their own reads on characters, perform their characters in their own unique ways, and find things that we as designers may never have thought of. And we can do this using what I was just talking about, by building a language of physicality where your actions you can take convey certain things and can then be interpreted by your fellow characters to produce a new version of a scene or bounce off of each other in a way that you might not expect. And again, hopefully find something new. So that is my talk. Thank you all for coming and listening. If you're curious about like the nitty gritty details of the technical way that I've worked on this idea, I am happy to answer questions about that. I am happy to talk about the like specific design aspects of it that I didn't go into in this talk. And I can do that here, offline, whenever. If you are interested in more of what I do, my personal site is the first link there. If you want to see some of my published games, my itch page is the second link there. And if you want to look at the code base for the acting system I built, which I was talking in a very high level about, that is the last link there. And you can find me on all of the different social media platforms, co-host, Blue Sky, Twitter, Mastodon, all of those, at Quakeful Tales. All right, everybody. Thanks again. And I hope you enjoyed it. Bye.
All right. Well, that was wonderful. Very exciting. And we have, I think, most got problems sort of kind of worked out. So we are taking some questions, and I believe that Nick is here to join us for a bit of Q&A. I know that you're traveling, so we were using a mix of recorded and live. Do we have Nick Kawa? Any minute now. Okay, you want to bring Nick on? And we'll get into a bit of Q&A, which could be just audio, if that's what works. Excellent. Hooray! Hi, Nick.
Hey, oh, hang on. For some reason, I can't hear.
Oh, okay. I'm just going to keep talking so it's easier for you to tell when it's fixed. And yes, for people in the stream, it should be working better now in the social space. You should be able to refresh if it's too quiet and hopefully hear chat. How's it, Nick? Oh, okay. Now I can't hear you. Maybe you can hear me. We're working on it. If nothing else, we will have the social space. But we have a little bit. We have 5 minutes here to work things out. We're working through it. Yeah. I'm going to pontificate about some things from the chat while you figure it out. If you figure out what's up with your mic, feel free to just interrupt me and start talking. I know that one question that came up that then got answered in the chat was about the different ways to do kind of expression and gesture in things like text-based. And so you were bringing up some points there about using different elements of typography, like, you know, the kerning, the bold, the italics, the different kind of things with text, which I think is interesting to get into how that works in different kind of mediums and how that's built into some things like RenPy. Oh, I heard something. Is it working better? Maybe you can't hear us.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, there we go. It was just
Wonderful.
Stream decided to use different audio.
That's totally fine. We've got a few minutes. We finally made it. Excellent talk. Thank you very much for taking part and dealing with our technical challenges today. I'll get right into a question. So Hillext asked, what techniques from theater haven't made their way into the roguelike or game design space yet? And presumably, what are some ones that you think would be interesting to bring into those spaces?
So, I mean, obviously, I talked about acting in this, but and part of the reason I did is a lot of acting stuff hasn't quite made it in. But then even stuff like directing and the way that you can like play with a scene at a high level as a director, it's like figuring out sort of the general tone of a scene, sort of the themes present in a scene, and like playing with those beyond like I am a character that's embodied. So that's one of them. And then I mean, like I said, I'm a playwright. Doing things like it's kind of hard to be a playwright in a game, but so I'll be academic for a minute and
You'd be as academic
so
as
Aristotle,
you want.
who I have
I
many
love it.
problems with, he has a thing about playwrights shouldn't do anything new. They should just like remix whatever they're doing. And so you can almost argue like hypertext is sort of that style of, we have this authored thing and you are moving around it and changing the way you're experiencing it like as a viewer, and that's sort of like what he talks about in terms of like what a playwright's job is.
Yeah, I
There's
think that
also
the
some
idea of
stuff
even
with like lighting design, because you can do a lot with like mood, and then that's another job I've done. So I'm more familiar with like, oh, you can play around with.
yeah. The question of like interpretation and being more aware of, you know, how are people interpreting this, and trying to encourage them to interpret in different ways. Like that's something interesting to me. I feel like I haven't seen come up as often in how we talk about game design.
Yeah, and so I've talked a little bit about the game project that I've been working on for a while as part of my research and being an independent game developer. And I've described this in my MFA as something that was too close to fighting games in terms of how successfully it captured like that aesthetic. And part of the reason I said that was because it's a game that requires a lot of interpretation and legwork on the player's part to like figure out, do you like the performance? Do you like the way a scene feels? Do you agree with like what you were doing with the text? That's a lot of like dramaturgical stuff that is very hard to do if you don't have any training. So different kind of difficulty than fighting games, but sort of that similar feel.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you know, there's been lots of discussion in chat. I think that someone said like this is the kind of talk that they will be coming back to in the recording to really dig into, since there's a lot of interesting ideas. I think it's thank you so much for joining and getting a few questions in there. But yeah, so I was glad we were able to make a little bit of the Q&A work, and hopefully I know you were around in the social space chat, so people who are interested in talking more in the breakout room can do that after our final talk of the day, which is coming up now. So